Morning. Oh, Scott, my apologies. Good morning. How are we doing? Welcome to the first Saturday Social 2024. Hope you're all fit and well. Just going to wait for a few people to start pitching up. Hopefully they do start pitching up. We've got somebody just arrived in the chat. Who is that? Can't see their name as yet. Good morning anyway. My apologies. My phone's just gone off. Just to fill you in. This is a no video, no agenda, no script kind of show. So just turn up when you feel like it and let's have a chat. Mark Whiting's just joined us. Morning, Mark. How are you? Whereabouts in the country are you based, Mark? Let me know. I know we've been speaking for months and months and months, but no idea exactly where you are in the world. Footy, I know, is down in sort of Devon way. Morning, Footy. Good of you to join us. I tell you what, I'm just going to liven things up just a little bit. I've chosen some music for a Saturday morning. That's kind of the mood for a Saturday morning. I'm going to turn it right the way down though, just to have that plinking away in the background. That's better. We're going to wait for a few other people to arrive, but it's been a funny old week. Obviously, we lost two demolition companies this week, Waldridge and Bluecon, both gone to the wall, although there is a very real possibility, I think, that Bluecon is not all as it might seem. There is Chris Ford. Morning. Chris, not figured out how you comment on this computer. Well, whatever you've done, it worked. Footy is enjoying the jazz in the background. Ken Hatcher has just joined us. Pizza last night, was it, Ken? I didn't check, but I'm assuming it probably was. But good of you to join us all the way down in Welsh Wales, Ken Hatcher. Yeah, as I was saying, lost a couple of demolition companies. By comparison, I mean, I think demolition has done rather better than construction. Construction has lost an awful lot of companies in the past 18 months or so, and appears well set to lose a few more as well. Watching a podcast from Steve Kerslake at Construction Sport yesterday, and he used the expression, which is an expression I've used in the past myself. He said that construction is broken. I'm inclined to agree on a number of levels on that. If you've got any thoughts on that, please let me know. But I wonder. And we're gearing towards, I probably just need to clarify. I think I said yesterday on yesterday's show that we were supposed to be meeting again on our Wednesday of this week. It's actually Wednesday next week. It's the 21st that we're getting together to discuss who speaks for the construction industry. But I've been thinking about that in advance of that show that we're doing with Andy Stevens. We've got a situation where when you think about all of the disciplines within the demolition and construction industry, you've got architects, asbestos removers, scaffolders, pilers, plasterers, painters, decorators, electricians, plumbers, all of the things, right? And they've all got their trade associations, and all those trade associations get together from time to time to presumably set the world to rights. And yet they don't really set the world to rights. So I've got a couple of points on that. Even if you're being absolutely 100% generous, those trade associations probably account for 50,000 people. You know, all of the managing directors and chief executives and all these, company owners and what have you. That I would guess is about the number 50,000 maybe across all those trade associations, and yet the industry employs about 3 million people. So we've got the rules and regulations being made by a tiny, tiny percentage, which is weird. Chris Ford just said, look at my post. I haven't figured out how you work a phone. It's a real experience watching on the phone and the computer. There's a time delay. Yeah, there is a time delay. And there's even a time delay across platforms. If you're watching on Facebook, you're probably getting the message ahead of Instagram. If you're watching on LinkedIn, you're probably getting it even faster still. It's a bizarre old setup. So yeah, going back to the previous point, we do have what I can only describe as a toxic work environment in the construction industry. Lots and lots of bullying, lots and lots of sexism, lots and lots of racism, and all of the things that goes with it. Would that be the case if there was a forum through which the actual construction and demolition workers themselves could make their voices heard and make their presence felt? And thinking even more deeply about that, That music's just gone weird. I can only apologise. It appears that we've got a problem with the music. Tell you what, bear with me. I'm going to refresh the feed. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, no idea what happened there, but I'm back again. And good morning to Craig from CSW. Jazzy day. It was a jazzy day until the music just freaked out. I'm going to try. I'll tell you what. I'm going to stick with this music because I know this one works. How are you doing, Craig? Yeah. So I was saying just before I was so rudely interrupted by freaking out music. Chris Saul says, I no problem here. I could hear it. Prefer the upbeat. Yeah, it just seemed to stall for some reason. No idea why. Yeah, we in construction and therefore demolition and all the other disciplines that go with it do operate on this boom bust cycle. About every decade or so, we have a high followed very, very quickly afterwards by a low. So one of the questions that I have is, do we do enough as an industry to what is the expression that was coined by a former chancellor? I can't remember which one it was that said it, but he was talking about fixing the roof while the sun is shining. Do we do enough to fix the roof while the sun is shining? That'd be the first question. And if the construction workers themselves were given more of a voice, would we still have that same high and low cycle that we seem to have to put up with every few years? Or would they be able to influence things in a different way? One of the reasons I ask that is in the aftermath of a few of the companies going bust, and we have had a fair few in demolition recently, there always seems to be these stories of demolition directors, and I'm sure construction has exactly the same. Demolition directors, living high on the hog. They've got their fancy car collection. They're living in their moated house. I don't know whether they have manservants as well. They've got their holidays on their holiday homes in far-flung destinations. They jet off on first-class travel and all of the things. Would that be necessarily the case if we were to have some kind of central forum? And I keep referring to forum because I'm just loath to use the word union. I'm not proposing for one moment that we go unionised. And apparently it seems that unionisation is not a great idea in this industry anyway. I was speaking to somebody just a couple of days ago, and they were saying about the fact that Unite the Union actually represents construction, but people on the ground, the kind of people that watch this show, don't really have a great deal to do with the union at all. Very, very few are members. And I'd love to know, are you a member? Are you a member of a union? And if you are, let me know. But do you work with anyone that is a member of the union? And does the union make any difference? That's what I'd like to hear. Music is really starting to wind me up this morning because that stopped for some reason. Let me do it again. There we go. That's much, much better. You can see I'm on a different screen today. Well, not a different screen. I'm actually on exactly the same screen, but I've got it set up differently. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to get musical problems. No idea what that's all about. So, yes, I'd love to get your take on it. If the industry were unionised more thoroughly, would you be a member? Would you join up? Would you pay for the privilege? Would you attend union meetings? Do you think they would make a difference? Love to get your thoughts on that. What else was there? Yeah, I was watching Steve Kerslake of Construction Sport. He does a weekly podcast, video podcast. You can catch it over on YouTube. I think it's called What's Happened This Week with Construction Sport. And one of the points that he made yesterday was, well, there were 2 points that really stood out for me. One was the fact that he said construction is broken. That was the one. But the one that really leapt off the screen to me was talking about drugs and alcohol. And he certainly wasn't suggesting that drugs and alcohol should be allowed. Far from it. But he was basically saying that if we had compulsory drugs and alcohol testing on all sites in the UK, construction would stop. Is that true? Is that true? I'd love to hear from you. And can somebody just type anything in the chat, because it's the chat's just gone very quiet. I just want to make sure that people are actually able to hear me and that you're seeing what I'm saying. Just type yes or send me an emoji just to let me know you're there. I can see there are people in the chat, but nobody is actually saying anything, and I wonder if the chat is actually working. So if you could type something, that would be very, very helpful. Yes, drugs and alcohol. Are you seeing that out on site? I know we've had a discussion about this on a number of occasions, and I know lots of people have said they've encountered it, but I'd love to get a more up-to-date take on that. I'm starting to worry if you're actually getting your chat through. There we are. Thank you for that, Footy. Yes, I'm sure it would stop because there's a lot of people up there actually smoke a wacky backy when they're actually working at certain places. Well, I mean, that's the thin end of kind of the thin end of the wedge. Do I want to be working alongside somebody driving the excavator if they are high as the proverbial kite? No, I certainly don't. But I guess the whole wacky backy, as you describe it, I mean, at least that brings a degree of chill. Should we have a concern about harder drugs and those that have a more radical effect upon your mood and the way that you work and that kind of thing? And I've just seen Gaz Evans has popped up. He's popped up on LinkedIn. I can see him saying good morning. I can see that, but I can't see it over here, which is weird. Chris Ford says, hadn't noticed it had stopped. Too busy listening to what you were saying. Don't think it's just directors that have fancy houses and holiday homes. Seems to be a general thing. And the music has just gone again. I think I'm going to do without the music. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to refresh again because this is starting to wind me up now. I'm definitely going to go without the music now. That's not doing me justice this morning. Graham Williams, not only doing wacky backer, they're also doing class A drugs as well, like cocaine. Yeah, do I want to be working beside somebody that's on cocaine? Yes, they would be super productive, but are they also dangerous to themselves and to me as well? Footy also says, I wouldn't do it, not worth the risk or your job or injuring other people. I wouldn't do it anyway. Gary Muirhead just joined us. Morning, Gary. We've been talking about drugs and alcohol. We've been talking about bankruptcies, and we've been talking about unionisation. If you got anything to contribute, I'd love to hear from you. Mick Knowles just joined us as well. Mick, you have your finger on the pulse of these things. Watched Construction Sport. What's happened this week, last night over on YouTube, and Steve Kerslake of Construction Sport. I'm just going to very quickly recap for Mick. Said that if we instigated a program of compulsory testing for drugs and alcohol in the construction and demolition industry, the industry would grind to a halt because it is so rife. I've got a couple of questions off the back of that. Should that matter? I guess is the first one. You know, if we've got a workforce that is so intent on drugs and alcohol in the working day, should they be allowed to continue? That is one of my questions. Chris Ford says, never tried wacky backy or any other drug apart from alcohol and smoking. Not had a fag in 35 years, but I do like the odd pint. Next Tuesday and Wednesday accepted. Yeah. I'm exactly the same. And I didn't even go as far as smoking. I've never even tried a cigarette. I did like a drink back in the day. Sadly, it turns out drink didn't like me quite so much. But yeah, did that. What's Footy saying? No builder. What actually does it? He's on a bricklayer on certain sites. He gets told when the drugs are being done, testing, so they don't come in. And that is precisely the point. We've got exactly the same situation with drugs and alcohol testing as we have with the NFDC site audit. If you are told 2 weeks in advance that, the drugs lady is coming to test you, well, if you get caught at that point, then you are incredibly, incredibly stupid. And as I say exactly the same about the NFDC site audit. I think at its heart, it's a good idea. But if you know that a specific site is going to be tested at a specific time, at a specific date, if you are found to be wanting in any way, it's your own downfall, because you've had plenty of warning to make sure that everything is hunky dory. But is that honestly the case? I mean, obviously, I spoke to an occupational nurse a few years ago, and she was mentioning the fact that she'd been summoned to a London demolition site. It actually wasn't a London demolition contractor; it was from somebody outside London, but they had 11 guys working on a site, and she arrived and did the drugs and alcohol testing. Every single one of them failed. And it was drugs, it wasn't alcohol. Every single one of them failed. CSW, Craig says, in essence, I don't have an issue with intoxication, but in workplace. Question, how would it work if you took them out with a machine? If you took them out with a machine, what you mean if you hit somebody with a machine, if that's what you mean, I guess you would be. Well, I mean, there was a case a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, of a guy who was high as the proverbial kite over in America, and he killed somebody, and he was prosecuted. But I do wonder about what the comeback is on the company that employed him. Obviously, they've got a duty of care. Were they checking to see if he was in fact intoxicated? Chris Ford, Ian Jury, God bless him, saying sex and drugs and rock and roll is all my brain and body needs, but stuff the drugs. Yeah, absolutely. I've seen half the site leave when the drug testers turn up, says Ken Hatcher. Excuse me 1 second. I know there's a push on this up in Scotland with Callum McIntosh at the Scottish Plant Owners Association and his team. But and this is another one of those issues, I think, where the working man, and when I say man, I mean working woman as well, we are all very aware of what is taking place on our sites. Ken has just said it, Footy said it, Craig Williams said it, Chris Ford has said it. We are all aware of the fact that drugs and alcohol are being abused on site. So why is nobody doing anything about it? And the follow-up question to that is, are they not doing anything about it? Because as Steve Kerslake said, if we were to sanction everybody that was found to be intoxicated in any way, shape or form, the industry would grind to a halt. And a follow-up to that, and I realise that there are some people that drink for fun, and I realise there are some people that take drugs for fun. I'm not naive enough to believe that is not the case. But bearing in mind, we talk a lot on this show about the stresses of working in this industry. We talk about the toxic work environment. How much of the drugs and alcohol that is being abused on site is as a result of people self-medicating because their working life is just so bloody awful? If they are required to work long way from home, away from family, away from support networks, if they are being constantly barracked about what they need to be doing, they're running too slow, they're behind on productivity. If you are being bollocked from breakfast time until the time you go home, are we as an industry and our toxic work environment, are we actually leading people towards drugs and alcohol? I'd love to get your take on that. Ken Hatcher says, I like the 2-day notice, health and safety on the way. Let's clean up. So what does that achieve? It just basically becomes a snapshot. On the day that the drugs and alcohol person turned up, we were as clean as a whistle. The other 364 days of the year, high as a kite, drunk as a lord. Is that what we're saying? Vehicles to work and their hires are Not sure what that is. There'd be no workers left. That is a concern. Mick Norton says, only when drugs and alcohol is legislatively vested in the HSE's statutory remit will any meaningful change become reality. Similarly, the law must change to ensure drugs and alcohol are mentioned when they are contributory factors in accidents, near misses, and dangerous occurrences. Well, I wholeheartedly agree with the second one, but again, we keep coming back to this. I think the HSE has demonstrated through Redcar, through Didcot, and a whole host of others that they are underfunded, understaffed, and unable to cope with the current workload. If we were to mandate compulsory drugs and alcohol testing, is the Health and Safety Executive really the body that should be taking care of that? Because I don't honestly think they have the manpower or the woman power, come to that. I realise that they have the power, but do they really have the resources to do that? Ken Hatcher, the only drugs I've ever had are chocolate and alcohol. Not a bad judge, particularly the first one. Chris Ford says, when I was young and God was a boy, it wasn't unusual to go and have a pint at lunch. Very few abused the privilege. Not saying I agreed with it, but that's how it was. Listen, I was exactly the same. Now, bearing in mind, I worked in an office. So, the only heavy machinery I was operating was a typewriter. You could probably trap your fingers if you really, really went out and enjoyed yourself at lunchtime, but you're not really much of a danger to anybody else in the office when you've had a pint or two. And I did exactly the same. And listen, I've said this before, and that's one of the reasons I don't drink anymore. I was a news reporter back in the late 80s when Canary Wharf and London's Docklands were being built, and 3 days a week, sometimes possibly even 4. I was required to go to some topping out ceremony down in Docklands, where I'd be plied with drink at 7 o'clock in the morning. You'd turn up and they'd hand you a glass of champagne, and I do distinctly remember going onto one site to see a topping out, and I'd actually been out the night before, so I was feeling a little the worse for wear. And I actually said, no, I can't do champagne. Have you got a soft drink? And the woman looked at me like I'd landed from Mars. And they had to send out for somebody to go and buy a carton of orange juice. And rather than coming back with, a big carton that I could sit there and cure my hangover with, she came back with one about that big. I'm going to say good morning to Douglas Cullum, who's just joined us. Not only legalised, but sensei. Let me try that again in English. Not only legalised, but sensationalised here in Washington State. Good morning to Washington State. Clearly an effort directed at destroying the workforce. Would leaders everywhere have stated their goal is to reduce world population by 7 billion? That should do it. I'm not entirely sure that I agree with the conspiracy theory behind that. But I do wonder what the experience is over in parts of the states where they have legalized cannabis use. What is the situation in terms of workplace? Obviously, you can buy certain drugs legally in places like Washington State, but what is the regulation in terms of actually using them on site? And bearing in mind, you not only have you got, as somebody described it earlier, wacky backy, but I know there's a pretty good trade in what do they refer to them in the States as? Gummies. Yeah, edibles. Edible, what are they? CBD, I guess. Not an expert. Chris Ford says, personally, if I knew one of my employees was under the influence of anything, they'd be going home. Yeah, I would expect exactly the same. Craig says, how many of these companies and the health and safety officers are knowing and facilitating this drugs issue? Your view, please. Facilitating in as much as I think some, quite a few, are looking the other way. We've mentioned this story on the show in the past, and I'm sure this isn't unique. I actually had a phone call from a guy who was on a site where there was not just drug abuse, but there was drugs being, we're talking Class A drugs here, actually being sold by the people on the site. And he had gone to his site supervisor to protest because, as far as he was concerned, they were a danger to him and his fellow workers. And when he went to find the site supervisor, said site supervisor was around the back of a shed actually partaking with the guys that were selling the drugs. What do you do about that? Now, personally, the obvious answer is you send them all packing and you get them replaced. But your job comes to a stop. How do you go about telling your client? It kind of goes around in circles. And I think one of the issues that we have, as I say, about the idea of turning a blind eye, I think one of the issues that we have is that nobody wants their job to stop. We've already talked about the constant pressure that construction and demolition companies are under. I don't think anybody would want to stop, even if it meant, we're aware that Dave has had a few, but we've got to keep going because the client is expecting us to get this job done by a certain time. Gary Muirhead says, just do what they do in the railway industry. If you're tested for drugs and alcohol and fail, you get a lifetime ban. Yeah, and listen, I mean, I've been on sites, HS2 included. I had to, bearing in mind I only drive a camera, I had to do a drugs and alcohol test before being allowed on HS2. And when you're working alongside the railway industry, and I know companies like Erith, for example, have worked very, very closely in the rail industry at places like Blackfriars, and they've abided by those kind of things. They also work in the nuclear industry where the same thing is the case. But I do wonder about that as a notion as well. And this is not peculiar to Erith. Let me make that absolutely clear. But we, as an industry, be it demolition or construction, I mean, I know demolition better, but as an industry, we do find ourselves working very, very close with allied industries, often allied industries with higher standards and more stringent legislation, like rail, like petrochemical, like the nuclear industry. And what I find surprising is that we will work alongside those industry sectors for 6 months, a year, 3 years, and then when that job is over, those same people will then go from there and then go back to the old way of doing things. You would have thought that having gone through all the pain and the process of actually getting up to that standard for that job, they would maintain that standard. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Ken Hatcher has said, Sir was very Costain was very keen on drug testing when I was with him 10 years ago. Test every month. I think the only way it works is for that test to be randomized, though. You literally, you don't know when the test is coming, because that's the only way you're going to wheedle it out. And there you are. Now, here's another question, because you guys are all out there working in the industry, not had one of the last 8 years on housing sites. When was the last time anyone was drug or alcohol tested? Chris, Gary, Footy, anybody else? When was the last time you were drugs and alcohol tested? I'd be interested to know, because I was on the HS2 site, or was that 6 months ago? So I was tested 6 months ago, and bearing in mind I'm a camera jockey. What about you guys? You guys are actually on site. When were you last tested? I'd love to get your take on it. I don't want drugs and alcohol to just overtake this show, because it's part of a wider discussion. And one of the things, and this is kind of building up to our show on the 21st, 7 p.m. on the 21st, which is Who Speaks for the Construction Worker. When I first started this show this morning, I was talking about the fact that we have a kind of it's not even kind of an imbalance. We have an imbalance in that the industry as a whole is run by a very, very few people. Let's take the National Federation of Demolition Contractors, for example. A lot of the rules and regulations and training regimes that we have to abide by within demolition originated with the NFDC. Well, the NFDC at the moment is about 130 members. So it's less than a quarter of the entire UK demolition industry. But the actual decisions were made by a handful of people, 10, 20 people laid down the rules and regulations. And yet the 25, 30, 35,000 people that work in demolition have to abide by those. You write that large across the whole construction industry, taking in architects and civil engineers and plasterers electricians, plumbers, all of those industry disciplines. If you put together all of their trade associations, you're probably talking at best about 50,000 odd people, and they are laying down the rules for 3 million plus. It's pretty close to apartheid, isn't it? Is that not the case? So, who was most recently tested? Ken Hatcher was 8 years ago. Graham says, can't remember the last time. It was a lot years ago. Chris Ford, never had a drug or alcohol test in my life yet. And bearing in mind, Footy has been fairly recently, been for a medical, wasn't drugs or alcohol tested then. So as it stands at the moment, the most recently tested person, or the recently alcohol and drugs tested person, is me. Me. And I drive a camera. Yeah. What does that tell you? What does that tell you? And listen, I mean, I know because on HS2, there was an entire building set aside for inductions, and the ground floor of that building was for drugs and alcohol testing. And I was one. Well, I was one. Fred was also with me, and Peter Haddock from Content with Media was with me as well. And we were 3 out of 50, 60 guys that were being tested concurrently. So I don't think for one moment they were testing us as part of the PR. You know, look at the lengths that we're going to here. I don't believe that to be the case at all. But I do wonder. And when you think, you know, because of what I do for a living, you know, we have had to sign waivers about the fact that we're going to fly a drone over a site. Now, our drone is actually too small to be regulated. It's very, very lightweight. It's 249 grams, I think it is. So it's way too small to be regulated, and everything else. But there's a concern about, you know, a little drone like this potentially hitting somebody on the noggin. But if you're off your tits on drugs or alcohol, apparently that's just dandy. Mick Norton, with a very long answer, says drugs and alcohol abuse needs robust deterrence. Take a leaf out of the military book. In 1967, my surveyor was caught with wacky backy in his old Holborn tin. My dad used to smoke old Holborn whilst we were building an airfield in the Thai-Laos border. He was arrested, flown to Singapore, court-martialed, and received 7 years detention, dismissed from the army. A formidable deterrent in a world apart from today's soft snowflake approach to the UK construction sector. And I wonder, I know I'm a cynical bugger. That's probably why I ended up doing this for a living. I wonder if somewhere within the industry there are people, the industry Illuminati, you know, the reptilians of the industry. I wonder if they're looking at this and they're weighing up. And on one hand, they've got, we really do need to sort out this drugs and alcohol problem. And on the other hand, we've already got a skill shortage. If we ignore that lot, that's less bad. If we are happy to turn a blind eye on drugs and alcohol abuse, we will have less of a skill shortage. I wonder if that conversation has ever taken place. Anybody got any thoughts on that? Let me know. Ken Hatcher says, I don't understand. I know if you take drugs, you can't drive or work, so just don't take them. Yeah, it seems perfectly reasonable to me. And listen, there's a bit of me that says you shouldn't allow work to necessarily compromise your social life. So, you know, if you finished work on a Friday afternoon and you decide to go out on the lash with your mates, been there, done it. I've got several T-shirts, all with sick on them. I think that's perfectly acceptable. But you do know, you know, we know in terms of driving, you know, driving on the road as opposed to driving on site. We know that if you've been out on the lash the night before, the chances are you are still over the limit the following morning. So I think you take that into account. You know, if you've gone out on the sauce on a Friday night, maybe don't drive until Saturday evening. Maybe don't operate any heavy machinery until Monday. I'm with that. I am completely with that. But what we're talking about here is people that are doing this recreationally. You know, this isn't just a once a week or twice a week only at their own leisure. You know, this is taking place on site. You know, there are we've had instances. You know, I haven't seen him in the chat today, but I know our friend Dan Cullen was on a site not so long ago where a guy basically fell out of his cab, and when they looked, his cab was filled with empty whiskey bottles. Now, you know, there's a bit of me that says, you know, the guy should be taken home and you know, don't darken our doorstep again until you've got a clean bill of health. But why is he doing that? Why is he doing that? I mean, is the guy just an alcoholic? In which case, what led him to be an alcoholic? Or is he doing that because his work day is so bloody unpleasant? Definitely says Ken Hatcher. That's correct. Graham says, how many Cowboys drugs are in your system? A lot longer than alcohol. Well, I mean, certainly some of these drugs. I can't actually remember, but I'm fairly sure marijuana stays in your system for like a week, possibly even more than that. And I'm not saying it's necessarily impinges your performance for that long, but it certainly stays within your bloodstream. It is detectable for well over a week, if memory serves me correctly. I know it's a subject we've covered quite a lot, but I've never taken that much of an interest because it's not something I've ever had to contend with. I don't really take that much notice, but yeah. Craig says, have a great time. Have to scoop. Have a good day. Yes, you too, sir. There you are. He meant have a good day. Have a good one and keep the content coming over on LinkedIn. That's where I follow CSW, see what they're all up to. As I say, didn't want today to be all about drugs and alcohol. That was never the intention. If anybody's got anything else they would like to address. Here's another point, and again, this is building up to, it's kind of the feedback loop, I guess, towards our show on the 21st. If you were given the opportunity to sit down with one of the real leaders, you know, somebody from the Construction Leadership Council or one of these major organisations, Build UK, for example, if you could sit down for half an hour with one of those people, what would you say to them? You know, would you sit down and say, "You're doing a cracking job, pal. Well, keep it up," or would you have something more forceful to say? Ken Hatcher is off to wash his car soon. Not a problem at all. Graham says, "I remember it's not only this industry; it's everywhere. Even McDonald's work as enough. It's in every portal, every job being done." Yeah, I agree. I don't know, unfortunately, what that says. I don't know if that's Chinese, Japanese, Korean. But if you're watching, good morning. I'm not even. Oh yeah, you're on Facebook. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Not, as I say, I can't read what you just said, but thank you for being here. Mick Norton says, before I retired, I was convinced that the trade unions were a barrier to change regarding drugs and alcohol abuse in the sector. Again, I mean, I don't know if you were here when I asked the question, Mick. Just how representative are the unions in construction these days? My understanding is, yes, Unite is the industry's union, but as far as I can tell, there are very, very few people actually on the ground in construction that are members of that union. And you know, question leads to question: are they not members because the membership doesn't give them the value that they were looking for? Or are they not members of a union because they are actively discouraged from being a member? I know we've had people being blackballed in the past because of their unionisation. It's going back at least a decade, possibly even more. But is that still the case? Are you seen, if you decide that you are going to join a union and you are vocal about it, or at least public about it, are you blackballed? Are you sidelined? Are you labelled a troublemaker? I'd love to hear from you on that. I think they are doing a good job as far as they are aware. It's the management that don't carry it forward. Not many care on site anymore. I think it's the way the UK is going downhill. I don't think that's. I'm always conscious of the fact that I'm a man of a certain age, and I remember my dad saying that the country was going downhill 40 years ago, 45 years ago, and I remember thinking, you've never had it so good. You were born during the Blitz. You know, what the hell are you talking about? And I think there is a bit of a generational thing. I think you always think that the past was better and the country's going downhill. But I would say I don't even think that is specifically a UK issue. You look at the problems that the Americans have got with opioid abuse and fentanyl and that kind of thing. We've seen bits of that here, but certainly not to the degree they've got it over there. The unions are not representative nor a means of the solution. They are a major part of the problem, says Mick Norton. It's an interesting point. So, with that being said, Mick, we've already we're laying the groundwork for the show on the 21st. You've got a few thousand people making the decisions for the asbestos industry, the scaffold industry, and so on down the line. We've got all of these people, and we've got about 3 million workers having to abide by them. And they just basically have to tip their hat and say, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir, and I will fall into line. Where do those people go to air their grievances? Because they certainly can't go to their employer. Where do they go? What do they do? Peter McKenna says, morning, you nearly missed it, or you certainly did. Oh, the fun we've had this morning. Dancing girls, free money, and we even gave away a car. First thing, we didn't do any of those things. Morning, Peter. Good of you to join us. Love the new logo. No farmers, no food. No construction, no progress. There, I'll add that one into the mix. I've obviously been thinking quite a bit about this with this announcement from the London Assembly that they are planning at some point in the future to start actively discouraging demolition. There's lots of things to talk about with that, and I'm not going to do that right now because I'm planning to do this finish in about 20 minutes time. But one of the things that occurred to me with this is, as it stands at the moment, if you look at the skyline of London or Paris or Berlin or Milan or Madrid or New York or any major city, you see the tower cranes and you see progress. You can take the heartbeat or the pulse of a city just by looking at the skyline and seeing, look at the progress. Old being replaced by new. If we get this plan in place whereby demolition is discouraged to the point of being almost outlawed, are we saying that we will get to a point in 2030, something like that, where the London skyline will be fixed in time? Rather than where we've seen the rise of the Shard and the Gherkin and the walkie-talkie and the cheese grater and all of those iconic buildings, are we going to say at some point in the very near future, because of our concerns over embodied carbon and sustainability, that doesn't happen anymore? We do not have a progressive skyline. We don't have a progressive building industry. We are just going to fix everything, and then from that point on, we're just going to retrofit and refurb. Is that really what we're saying? Doesn't send the right message to me. Graham says, if you get on site, you get drug tested or alcohol tested, it comes up on your CSCS card, it's revoked and not allowed back for 5 years. Listen, we all know these cards are smart cards now. You can have your additional qualifications added remotely. They can be beamed onto your card so that your card is updated. Why not add the penalties as well and the sanctions? Was pissed at work or was high as a kite, and as you say, as it stands at the moment, and I think that's where that is an absolutely valid idea. As it stands at the moment, if I went to work on a demolition site or a construction site and I was off my face on something or other and I was fired, if I was fired at, what is it now? It's 10:43 in the morning. If I was well connected enough, I could be back at work by 2 o'clock this afternoon on another site. Is that right? Is that right? Should that penalty not follow with you? Ken Hatcher is just leaving us. Thank you for being here, Ken. Thank you for joining us. Hope your car is shiny by the time you finish. A 1978 driver strike. The unions were absolutely useless. There were more scabs than picketers because the union said everyone would lose their jobs. I've said it before, say it again. I was a member of the National Union of Journalists back in the day, and they too were the best part of useless. In fact, they seem to be protesting things that nobody else cared about apart from the unions. But we have an industry now where regardless of whether the industry is up or down, regardless of the cycles of the economy and everything else, ultimately the working man and the working woman are the ones that pay the price. You look at the recent situation with the 4 demolition companies that have gone to the wall in recent months. Scribs first, McCormack second, Waldridge next, and then Bluecon as well. Although, as I've already said, Bluecon not quite as clear cut as it would appear, and hopefully they will be bouncing back. But you look at those companies, the directors of those companies, in many instances, will already have dormant companies, and basically, when they can see the writing on the wall, and their main company is going down the toilet, there's a very quick shuffling of assets and that kind of thing, and chances are that company folds on the Friday, and on the Monday they start work on a new one. That's not the case necessarily for the working man and the working woman. So they are carrying the can for whatever has taken place. Now, in some instances, it is just an unpleasant turn of economic fortune. I fully understand that. I'm certainly not saying that all companies go out of business because of financial mismanagement and that kind of thing. But regardless of the cause of that collapse, ultimately, it is the working man and the working woman that are left unable to pay their mortgage, pay their rent, put food on the table, while the directors, who have been living quite a pleasant life up until that point, basically shuffle the deck and come back a day, a week, or a month later. How can we allow that to continue? And even setting aside this idea of stamping our feet rather, and banging our fists on the desk, what about ideas? Again, because it's the bit I know best, the National Federation of Demolition Contractors and the Institute of Demolition Engineers get together in various guises, a dozen times, 20 times a year, in regions, in national, and but they get together and they sit around, and they've encountered a problem, whether it's contaminated wood or whatever it might be. But they basically have a forum where they all sit together and they say, we've got this issue. What do we do collectively to address that issue? But what about the 3 million odd people out on site who might actually have a better idea of how to solve that? What about the fact that 3 million people are seeing issues that maybe their bosses aren't even aware of? Where do they go? Who do they speak to? How do they go about changing the industry from within? And I don't actually have an answer to that. Peter McKenna says a CSCS card is around 45 quid to get on a construction site. The old Epic card scheme for quarries used to be the same cost. Nowadays, the new quarry passport is 310 quid. WTF? Why? Peter, you know the answer to that as well as I do. I think industry training was instigated with the very, very, very best of intentions. If we can raise the knowledge, the expertise, and the understanding of the workforce, the industry will be safer, the industry will be more productive, we'll have less accidents, less fatalities, everybody wins. That's where it started, and that was why it was only 45 quid and so on down the line. And then that somebody became a lot of somebodies, saw that this was a commercial opportunity. So, excuse me. So you now have a situation where you have multiple layers of training organisers, training providers, card providers. It's become an absolute cash cow, and again, if you are the owner of a company and somebody says we're going to put up the cost of a card from £100 to £300, bearing in mind you've got to that meeting in your Bentley, you're going home to your £2 million house. You're not that bothered. And particularly bearing in mind that some of the cost will be borne by the fact that you employ some agency workers who will have to pay for that themselves. Now, we've got a situation at the moment with the end of grandfather rights and this idea of switching to MVQs for everybody. As an industry, so the construction bit, the demolition bit, all of the bits that were impacted by that, all just went, yeah, okay, we'll do that. We'll switch over to MVQs. Yeah, MVQs sound like a good idea. We'll do that. When there's tens of thousands, possibly more than 100,000, and I think Mick Norton will probably know the numbers on that, who woke up one morning to find what? The qualification that I've had for the last 10, 20, 30 years is now worthless. And I've got to pay whatever it is, £1,000 to get that changed, even though I've been doing that job for 30 years. Where do those people go? Where does that 100,000 people make their voices heard? Peter says, we know why. It's great if you're full-time and you can afford it, but only people that only do part-time, it's a burden. It's a burden if you do part-time. It's also a burden if you are self-employed as well. If you're self-employed, you are expected to foot the bill for your own training. And there will be a meeting somewhere in an oak panelled room that is filled with cigar smoke and the smell of port. And somebody said, we're currently charging £300 for this card. I've decided we're going to make it £500. Yes, here. And the self-employed bloke out on the site, probably won't even be told about it because they don't bother with that sort of thing. You'd be staggered the number of people that actually contacted myself and Ollie Guns after we were talking about the change to MVQs and grandfather rights, because they had no idea, because the training organizations take their money and then just send them on their way. They don't maintain any kind of contact. They don't keep them up to speed. They just send them on their way because they've got their money. But we were inundated by people saying, what? They've done what? What is an MVQ? Where do I get one? How much is it going to be? If you work in a quarry, you don't get grandfather votes, apparently. Clothing and anything else, you got self-employed, everything you got to pay for yourself, training, work boots, clothing, the lot. Should not be the case. Should not be the case. PPE, I think, is now regulated. If you are working on a site, your employer, directly or otherwise, has a duty to provide you with PPE. I think that is the current state of the regulations. But again, if you don't know that, and again, and I realise, in the grand scheme of things, this is a minor thing. You can probably kick yourself out. And I realise footy has a very specific requirement, what with his size 17 feet and all. But, by and large, you can kick yourself out with PPE for, 30, 40, 50 quid, something like that. High-vis trousers, pair of work boots, which you can pick up for 30 quid or whatever it might be. So, I mean, even if you said it was 100 quid, 100 quid, I'd rather have it in my pocket than not in my pocket. But, we're not talking major money here. But if you are unaware of the fact that your employer has a duty to provide that to you, do you think they're going to tell you? Or do you think they're just going to let you go and buy your own? Yeah. Peter McKenna says the driver's CPC for HGV drivers, 150 quid every 5 years. That's more affordable. More affordable, and that's good. I think that's good. But every 5 years. Now, I realise an HGV is a very specialised piece of kit. I realise, and I genuinely believe we should have a higher state of a higher benchmark for driving if you're driving something that qualifies as an HGV. But every 5 years, I passed my driving test in 1988, something like that. I've not had to sit a test since. I've not had to pay to update my driver's license. And I'll probably have the same driver's license unless they put some sort of expiration date on it. I'll have that until I pop my clogs, probably. Every 5 years. I mean, it's not a lot of money. 30 quid a year. Not a big deal. But Peter, you've driven HGVs and you will likely do so again. Do you ever forget how? Do you ever get in the cab and think, how the fuck does this work then? I bet you don't. Graham Williams says if you're self-employed, you have to pay for all your clothing. If you're employed by a company, they will supply it. Only way if you're working with somebody else on site, still self-employed. No, apparently that is not the case. That is not the case. If you're self-employed, but you are working under the auspices of somebody else, they should be providing your PPE. That is the latest word on the law, I'm sure. You can claim it all back, Graham, says Peter McKenna. Let's have a look. You can claim it all back if you're on the car, if you're self-employed. If you're on the cards, you can't. Chris Ford, £2 million house. I paid 150 grand for mine. Plant operators are the most picked on and licensed people there are. I know lorry drivers have to do a driver CPC, have taco rules, but when you pass a test to drive a lorry, that's about it. Yeah, absolutely. And I do realise. I mean, I was banding around £2 million for a house, bearing in mind I do live in the south. You know, I do I do realise there are variations, but you know that is not far from the truth. You know, when you have a look around, you know, bits of Surrey, bits of Kent, bits of Essex, and that kind of thing. You know, if you're a director or an owner of a demolition company or a construction company, that's the kind of power you're looking at. Yeah, it's not that's I didn't just pluck that figure out of the air. That's absolutely for real. People, look, it's nearly 11 o'clock. Oddly enough, I'm going to look at properties this afternoon, but that's a whole other story. I won't bore you with that now. But yeah, I'm going to go and grab myself a bacon roll. I think it's been a pleasure. It's been a joy. It does make me laugh. And I'm not going to hold him to account on this. But if you remember rightly, we had a bit of a chat on the Breakfast Show about a week ago, maybe a bit more than a week ago, and I asked people, what would you like to see on the show? And there was a certain guy called Dan Cullen, and Dan said, "I'd love to see the Saturday Social come back." So I said, Dan, as it's you, as you asked so nicely, I will bring back the Saturday Social. Where is he? Nowhere to be seen. Dan, you're a disgrace, sir, but you're forgiven. Chris Ford said, pub's open. If it's 11, it will be in about 3 minutes' time, maybe a little bit less than that. Peter McKinnon said, you don't forget how to drive a truck, but you forget rules and regulations. Also, there's updates to regulations, just like in construction. So the refreshers are a good idea. Good point. Cars should have the same. I'm inclined to agree with that. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. I mean, very close to maybe a year, 2 years, possibly, before my father passed away. Bearing in mind, he had been a chauffeur for a large part of his life, so he'd done advanced driving courses and various other bits and pieces. But should he have been driving a car when he was 77, 78? And, you know, I think the skill was still there, but maybe the reaction times weren't quite the same. You know, he'd done the test when he had 20/20 vision in both eyes. He was now knocking on the door of 80, and his eyes were the same age. Were they as good? Should he have done another test? Probably. I wouldn't necessarily argue with that, Peter. I think that's a valid point. Right, people, I'm going to wish you all well. Go and have a fantastic weekend, what's left of it. I'll see you again on Monday. Just to let you know, I'm doing a show on Monday. Probably need to finish pretty sharpish because I'm then jumping in the car and heading up for JCB. So there'll be no show on Tuesday. Chris Ford says, my stepdad still drives at 88. Yeah. Is he safe? I'm asking the question. I don't know. Graham Williams says, dyslexic. I don't think I'd get through the driving test ever again. Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly, I think I'd be all right on the theory. I mean, they didn't even have a theory test when I learned to drive. It was all part of the same. I'd get through the theory because I could go away and bone up on the damn thing. But I've got what have I got? 30 plus years of bad habits, bad driving habits. You know, do I drive with my hands at 10 to 2? Not very often. You know, do I check my mirrors as often as I should? Maybe not. So yeah, interesting chat. Everybody, please go and have a fun weekend. I'm back on Monday. No show on Tuesday, but then back Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday it is then. Try Ashbourne on Tuesday. Do you know, fully understand the new highway code updates? Honestly, no. No, as I say, I mean, if somebody suddenly mandated the fact that I had to go and sit the test again, I would have to go back to school and teach myself the latest updates. And there's Peter McKenna saying, "Have a good day." I think that's a good note to end on. Everybody, go and have a good day. Please go and have a good day. Look after yourself. Hold your family dear to yourselves, and I'll see you all on Monday for slightly shorter show than usual. In the meantime, I'm going to go and whack the provider of the music on this show because apparently we have a glitch. I don't know why, but we do. Thanks for your company. See you all soon. All the best.